The world of comics is built on secrets, both inside and out. After all, a series without foreshadowing, red herrings, and all sorts of fun references generally isn't worth reading. Similarly, with the comics industry having so many internal arguments and disagreements, there's also a fair share that goes on behind the scenes that you never see, until it's brought up in a comic itself. Even if it's blatantly in the middle of a page, often we still don't recognise either type of these reveals, because we're too focused on the next bout of action, or just because we don't get references to beefs between creators without already knowing their relationships. But this is arguably one of the most fun details about the medium, as fans are as capable of deciphering genuinely difficult comic puzzles as they are capable of missing something right in front of their eyes. I am Kirsten from What Culture Comics, and these are 10 comic secrets hiding in plain sight. Number 10. Steve Gerber is Thundersword. Secret Wars 2. One of the weirdest trends in comics is that when creators have a fallout, they will often turn the person they've beefed with into a supervillain in their upcoming work. While the most famous occasion of this is Stan Lee being made into the funky Flashman by an irate Jack Kirby, it's not the funniest. The funniest is Thundersword, who was made by the suitably named Jim Shooter in an attempt to mock Steve Gerber, who had recently left Marvel. Having quit over disputes about his ownership of Howard the Duck, who he had created, Gerber made sure to make a few tastefully disparaging comments about the company before going to work with DC and in animation. And so it was more than a little suspicious when Thundersword rocked up, who was coincidentally also a children's animator who was outspoken about excessive violence in kids' TV. Couple this with the fact that Stuart Gadwell was a pretty goddamn similar name, and it's clear that this villain's sudden turn to violence was Shooter's way of satirising Gerber's involvement with the violent media he verbally opposed. On the plus side though, the armour Thundersword wore was kind of cool, so Gerber maybe wouldn't have been too offended. Number 9. The real duplicate is in hiding. Invincible. Aside from her using her powers for some scandalous purposes, most fans reading Invincible for the first time won't have been all that interested in Duplicate. She seems like a neat character, sure, but also a background character, which only seems all the more true when Rex cheated on Atom Eve with multiples of her. But as is the case with most background characters in Invincible, Kate's a lot more complex than we initially get to see, since she dies fairly early in the series. Comic deaths are often short-lived though, as issue 46 reveals that the original Kate has been hiding out for a long time, sending her clones in to fight so that she'd never die. Indeed, it seems that this twist was planned from the get-go, as the version of Kate we see that appears to have the number 1 on her costume may well have been a 7 designed to look just enough like a 1 that nobody raised any questions. Oh, the duplicity of Duplicate. Number 8. An alien language decoded. New Mutants, number 17. The best thing about comic fans is that if you give them even a hint about something, they will research it with a power so potent it must have been bestowed by some dark and nerdy god. But when New Mutants revealed a fun demon language and also translated it once or twice for the reader, they didn't seem to quite realise that fans would naturally see if they could figure it out. It turned out each of the symbols is made up of a language directly translated to a letter of the alphabet, meaning that you could, after creating a cipher, as some brave readers did, translate everything said in that dialect in the comic. So what surprises awaited? Well, some really weird ones. Since it appears that nobody expected the rest of the dialogue to get translated, they wrote a ton of plain wild stuff. For example, having a charging character scream, "Pork chop!" because why not, we guess. Highlight also included a ton of swearing and 2 characters discussing weird-looking genitals. It's a real hidden gem, in short. Number 7. The Grass Cutter. USAGI YOJIMBO. Sometimes comics use the idea of hiding a secret in plain sight far more obliquely than you might expect. This is possibly best seen in Stan Sakai's USAGI YOJIMBO series, which follows USAGI, a noble swordsman who also happens to be a rabbit. In one of the comic's more famous arcs, the Grass Cutter arc, USAGI obtains the elusive Grass Cutter sword, which allows the owner to try and claim Japan's throne. Naturally, a little worried this weapon will fall into the wrong hands, our favourite rabbit devises the perfect plan to keep it from ever going astray. But not by hiding it or by leaving it with someone trustworthy for safekeeping. No, USAGI goes one better than that, because this sword happens to have an exact replica, which is kept safely secured in a temple for visitors to gaze upon. By committing a classic case of switcheroo, the real grass cutter is instead placed in this temple, where it becomes totally safe because nobody will possibly think it's the real thing. It's the sort of stuff that's right out of the mythological tale, and that's exactly why it works so damn well. Number 6, Roger Cruz is called out. Uncanny X-Men number 325. Being inspired by other artists is arguably an important part of being motivated to create art, but some artists take the concept of being a little too inspired by other artists, in that they totally trace and copy panels for their own use. Whilst this was not a rare thing, especially in the early days of comics, nobody was ever exactly happy to see others more or less stealing their own work. Roger Cruz's particular penchant for doing so came in the spotlight via the Swipe of the Week website, which used to compare panels they thought looked similar or copied, allowing fans to vote on whether or not they thought this was the case, or just a coincidence. Generally, the art that he found to have copied came from artist Joe Madureira. Madureira clearly became aware of this at a certain point, because he left a diss in the pages of Uncanny X-Men number 325, on a newspaper that states, "Cruz swipes again," making his frustration known. Number 5, The Batman Who Laughs Speaks. The Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs series, despite being a tie-in by all means, is also an undeniably interesting comic. With this new evil Batman coming centre stage into the DC limelight, it's understandable that so many of us were interested to see more of him and his evil schemes. And he did prove a suitably powerful foe, with our heroic Bats having to also inject himself with some of the serum that turned his twisted self insane in order to be able to properly fight him. While this appears to have been solved with a cure at the end of the comic, there's a pretty big hint suggesting this particular Bat may not have managed to totally rid himself of the poison that was in his veins. During the last few pages, random letters of Bruce's dialogue are highlighted in red, which spelled out, "Right here still, haha!" which may instead show us that the Batman Who Laughs that we see in the main universe now is actually the one who defeated the original. Number 4, The Secret Rickroll, XKCD. For anyone who wasn't involved in the weirdness that was the internet culture in the 2000s, it's time to explain what rickrolling is. As many of you likely know, it's a term that's used to refer to the hilarious, if occasionally irritating trend where you lead people to click on a link only to surprise them with Rick Astley's "Never Gonna Give You Up." Around 2008, clicking on a link for just about anything on the internet left you with about a 33% chance that you'd accidentally rickroll yourself. As it turns out, this could also be said for comics, as in the iconic comedy comic XKCD, a hidden nod to Astley's finest work was hidden. Because in the 389th comic, the joke revolves around some music notes shown in the background, notes which you don't have to be able to read in order to get the joke. If you can read music well enough, you can hear the song though, and the music used for this joke is, of course, Never Gonna Give You Up. Number 3, Weapon X is weaponized. Weapon X number 28. One of the downsides about working on a comics is that not every series will be your magnum opus. Indeed, you'll probably end up working on at least one thing that you're still not all that keen on. As it turned out, those involved in the Weapon X series that began in 2002 felt similarly about their work on the project. So much so that one of them decided to implicitly state in the final issue how much of a drag the entire thing had felt like. We find this in issue number 28, a journal on page 12 which is supposed to detail an experiment done on Wolverine's eyes, but actually contains something very different. It reads, "I want this issue to be finished and over with. I don't like slogging through the last issue of a dead book." Which is pretty brutal, but also very honest. While it might have been heartbreaking for those who have read the previous 27 issues to find this on the 28th, it was at least likely very cathartic for whoever wrote it down. Number 2, the obvious Brainiac reveal, the New 52 Future's End. After the first page of the New 52 Future's End presents you with an evil robot spider Wonder Woman, you likely think that you won't be able to predict a single other thing in the entire rest of the series. And if you were suitably traumatized by seeing Diana made into a nightmarish Transformer knockoff, you very well might have missed one of the giant obvious clues that were put down in terms of some specific reveals. Because when a mysterious evil shows up in the series, many fans likely immediately knew who this figure actually was. Although the word Brainiac isn't uttered until issue 16, his symbol, the 3 circle connected circles, appears way before that, and not exactly subtly. They left much of the audience confused as to exactly how they were supposed to react to the actual reveal that Brainiac was preparing to invade Earth, as the proper reveal looks as though it's supposed to be a plot twist, but the signs were so apparent you could easily work it out far earlier. Number 1, the Saga of Master Bates. Star Wars Jedi Council Acts of War. In a field like the world of comics, there's often going to be a conflict over creative ideals, because with various people working on one project, you can be sure that they often don't all have the exact same end product in mind. This is doubly true of comics that take place in established universes, which leads us to the story of Soon Bates the Unfortunate. According to Bates' equally unfortunate creator, Randy Stradley, he'd created this character as a joke towards his editor. He found it annoying that said editor would always change Jedi names to have the word Master before them, and thus created Bates, hoping they'd see that editing Master in front of the name obviously makes the word masturbates. In a painful twist of fate, Stradley's regular editor Sue Rustini wouldn't actually edit this particular issue, meaning that she didn't catch Master Bates, and thus he was unleashed upon the viewing public. Hoping that people wouldn't remember this faux pas if it was dealt with quickly, poor Bates was then blown to smithereens. And there you go, the 10 comic secrets hiding in plain sight. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that bell to be notified of any new videos coming your way. But for now, I have been Kirsten Ria from What Culture Comics, and I will see you in the next video.